The average Church of Christ is 58 years old, has 80 members. There are 1,136 churches of Christ that are more than 100 years old. The average church plant, a church plant, 68% of church plants last more than 4 years. And according to what I read, 86 churches of Christ closed their doors last year. What is the history of this congregation? If you look back 10 years, is it trending upward in attendance and good works, even or declining? And can we extrapolate from that what the next 10 years might hold if the Lord delays His coming? If we continue on our present trajectory, where will we be in 2034? And what does God want us? Where does God want us to be? Now, there are different factors that contribute to that line or that trajectory or that decline, but a lot of it has to do with our comfort level, our willingness to work, our involvement. You may remember from reading the Old Testament that Mordecai talked to Esther in Esther 4 when the Jews were threatened by Haman, and he said, "Who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" And he convinced Esther, who was a Jew on the throne beside King Ahasuerus, that he did not know she was a Jew, and he convinced her. Mordecai convinced her to go in and talk to the king. Now the danger of that is if the king did not call her in, then he could have her executed. You didn't interrupt the king. But she said, "I'll do it. And if I perish," this is verse 16, "if I perish, I perish. I'm willing to put my life on the line to save my people." I read from Dr. Bob Cox, who was involved in the University of Texas education system some years ago, that movements, and this would include churches, but not just churches, movements go through 3 different phases. The first phase is called risk-taking. In the context of a church, this will be a church plant. Some families get together and they say, we really need a congregation in this place, this area. And they say, well, let's do it. Let's pray about it. Let's find a place. And maybe they meet in someone's basement, and then they rent a storefront, and then they continue to get the word out. They print up some flyers, and they go door to door. They talk it up among their friends. They say, "We've got a new congregation. Why don't you come Sunday?" And they're really involved in it. They're putting their own time into it, their own money into it. They've invested their reputations in it. They want this congregation to do well. And so for a while, they really are working hard. And the church grows. They're able to purchase some land a little later, maybe to put a building on the land, and the church continues to grow. People are converted, people move in, some transfers, and before long they've got elders in the church and deacons. And that goes on for a while. Then Dr. Cox said that the second stage that movements go through is caretaking, just maintaining the status quo. In the context of a congregation, that would mean we've arrived. We are recognized as one of the congregations in this area. We've got a youth group. We've got leadership. We've got a good song leader. Our preacher does well. We've arrived. And maybe they get to the point where they're no longer quite as involved in going out and talking up the church. And maybe even they put a little pressure on the preacher, don't rock the boat too much. We've got some members here that you may offend if you preach really strong from the Bible. Just tone it down a little bit. We don't want to cause any ripples in the church. The third stage that a movement goes through is undertaking. It begins to decline over time, and in a church context, that would look like this. Well, our contribution's gone down. We're going to have to cut something out. I don't know if we can afford to keep a full-time preacher. And then by and by, before long, the same 4 or 5, 6 or 10 men are on the schedule to do something every Sunday because that's all that are there to do it. And then somebody says, well, I don't know how long we're going to be able to keep this congregation up. We may have to close the doors. Now, what happened? They went from risk-taking to caretaking to undertaking. But the good thing about that is that we can reverse that process. Wherever we are, if we've moved out of the first stage, then we could go back to it. We can create a sense of urgency in the members at whatever stage or however many years a church has existed. If the fire is lit in the hearts of the members, then we can go back to that risk-taking stage. We've got to get out of our comfort zones. We've got to get beyond our fears of talking to people, our indifference about what happens to the church. So my question in Bible class, our question to consider this morning is, what am I willing to risk to see the church thrive? Not survive, but thrive. What am I willing to do? Well, we hired a preacher. Well, that's good. He'll do his part, no doubt. Well, we've got elders, so that's great. But what am I willing to do? You see, the church is a body, and every part of the body is important to the whole. So I might only be a little finger in the body of the church. I might be some part of the body that's not very noticed, but if some part of your body doesn't function, even though you don't know the name of it right now, you will learn the name of it. Because there will be a pain, there will be a situation. You will go to a doctor, you may be in a hospital until they get that body part working correctly, either with medication or therapy or whatever it is. So it is in the church. The church is never what it ought to be, what it could be, what God wants it to be, unless every member is contributing to that. So I ask again, what am I willing to do to see the church thrive? You see, we're moving the needle in our own personal lives, and what that will do is move the needle of the congregation. Because if we are indifferent, lackadaisical, lukewarm as members, then the church is not going to fly. It's not going to soar. It's going to dive, and it's going to die. Because the collective temperature of the members is the temperature of the congregation. So as we looked at our scale in the first lesson, 1 to 10, cold, lukewarm, hot, where are we on that scale? Well, whatever the aggregate is of all of us, if you take all of our temperatures, add them together, divide them by the number of members, that's the congregation's temperature. And is the congregation in the blue? Is the congregation in the red? Is the congregation in the orange or yellow? Is it lukewarm? If so, then the church is just treading water. And in the context of Revelation 2 and 3, when Jesus was evaluating those churches, He said, I'm going to remove your candlestick if you don't repent. Not all of them. Some of them didn't have anything that He gave them to correct. But most of them, 5 of them did. And so he threatened, if you don't fix these problems, then you won't be one of my churches. So it is possible that you and I could be in a congregation that no longer is being recognized by God as being faithful, as being one of His. And so we want to make sure that we stay in the path of truth and we stay in the path of fire, that we are on fire for God. Now let's talk about, as time allows us to, we'll go through 5 risks that we should be willing to take for the gospel to prevail, for the church to thrive. Number 1 is comfort zone. I have to be willing to risk my comfort. You know, we live in a comfortable society. People like to wear comfortable clothes. People like to have comfortable shoes. People purchase comfortable furniture and beds. People want comfort in their office situation, wherever it is that they work. Well, comfort is fine so far as it goes, but comfortable is not the way to change the world. People who change the world have to work. People who change the world get out of their comfort zone. They stretch themselves. They learn new tasks, how to do new tasks. They find themselves constantly stretching themselves to see what they can do. Let's go to Luke 15 and spend a few minutes in the lost chapter of the Bible. It's lost not because it ever was out of possession of humans and later put back, but it's lost because the content of it is about a lost sheep, a lost coin, lost boys. Parables of Jesus. There are 37 parables of Jesus in the book of Luke. And about 18 of them are unique to Luke, including the ones in Luke 15. You can't read a parallel passage in Matthew, Mark, or John for what we're about to read. Everything we know about these stories is found here in Luke 15. So I want to read the first parable with you. Notice the context of it in verses 1 and 2. You have two different kinds of hearts, and you have these in every congregation, every situation where the Gospels are preached, especially when it's preached over television, radio, or where there's a mixed audience of some Christians and non-Christians. You have good hearts, which the publicans and sinners had, because they assembled to hear Him. They wanted to learn and grow. Verse 2 says that the scribes and Pharisees murmured. They came, they were there, but they were not interested in learning and growing. They were looking for something to complain about. They were looking for some accusation to make against Him. So I examine my heart every time the Word of God is preached. I want to have a heart that's open, that says, teach me, help me learn, help me grow. I want to do better. I want to be ready to meet my God in judgment. So we have the choices there in verses 1 and 2. Now, beginning in verse 3, Jesus begins these parables. Verse 4 is the parable of the lost sheep. And I'll read it with you, and then I would like to notice with you 7 ideas here, because you have 7 contributing facets to winning a soul. This would be most applicable to bringing back a Christian that's fallen away. But it also applies to souls that have wandered away from God just in their lives. And I'll give you this as a preview. We won't, I don't think, be able to talk about the whole chapter today, but let me give you the 4 ways that people get lost, because they're revealed to us in this chapter. And it helps us to understand how people got where they were so that we can help them get back where they need to be. The mindset that contributed to their condition is a mindset that needs to be changed so they can come back. So here are the 4 ways. Number 1, the sheep just wandered away. He was out grazing one day, and he sees a tuft of grass, moves over there, and then there's another one farther out, he moves over there. So he just wanders around eating, maybe walking over to some water to drink at some point. And then toward the end of the day, he looks up and where is everybody? He's all by himself. And from what I've read about sheep, they don't have a good sense of direction. They cannot find their way back. So if he's going to get back, someone is going to have to find him. He just wandered away. What does that represent? That represents a person that did not have any hatred toward God. They did not deliberately say, I want to go and enjoy the pleasures of sin. They just sort of wandered away. It sometimes happens when young people grow up in a congregation, in a good family, with good Bible teachers and a good youth group, but they go to college, and they're away from everybody, and they're in a different environment, and there are temptations and challenges. They make new friends, and they continue going to church services for a while, but it's less frequent, and then it's only when they come home to visit mom and dad, and they go on Sunday while they're there, but then when they go back, they just sort of wandered away. They didn't mean to. It just happened. A second way that people get lost is the way the coin got lost in the next parable. A coin is an inanimate object. It doesn't lose itself. So it was lost by its owner. It was lost by the woman who had 10 coins. What does that represent? That represents a person in a congregation who is offended, who is injured or hurt by another member of a congregation. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes we can wear our feelings on our sleeves, and we can be offended by the least little thing. And I might say this. If the boss chewed you out at work right before you got off and you went home upset, would you kick the dog when you got home? What did the dog do to you, right? I mean, the boss is the one you're upset with. So, did God do something to us? Did God hurt us, injure us, offend us? No. Well, why am I taking out my angst against someone else against God? He will never do anything but the best thing for me because He can't, because He is 100% love. So, I'll say that, but the reality is that sometimes people are offended and hurt. And Jesus tells us, be careful about that. Matthew 18:3, better for a millstone to be hanged about the neck, cast into the depth of the sea, than offend one of these little ones. So be careful not to set a bad example for someone. Be careful not to speak in anger towards someone and say something out of the way. Be careful not to, we understand that. But if it happens, don't let it offend you. Don't let it drive you away from the Lord. But some people do. So some people get offended by someone else. Someone else is the cause for their wandering or leaving. Number 3, the prodigal son shows that people get lost intentionally. His mind was already in the far country before he ever asked his dad for the money to go. He already had that plan. Not many days after he got that money, he left because he wanted to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. And he deliberately left his father. And he went and he spent all of his money, and then he came to himself and he came back. Thankfully, he came back. Most prodigals never come back because the far country has a way of keeping us there. The far country has a lot of bad habits. It has people that we meet and become friends with. It has a person often that we marry that's not a part of the family of God. And then it's harder and harder to come back from that. But the prodigal came back, and thankfully, we can come back. The 3 things that the son lost when he was there: he lost his money, he lost his self-respect, and he lost his relationship with his God. What did he not lose in the far country? He never lost his father's love. He never lost his memories of home. And he never lost his ability to go home. Those are 3 things that God grants us, even in the far country. The 4th way that a person gets lost is they don't even know they're lost. They're lost in the pew. And that's the elder brother. See, the first 2 parables teach the way that the scribes and Pharisees should have been. And the last part of the 3rd parable teaches how they were. This is the picture of the mirror saying this is what God sees when He sees you. The bad attitudes, the criticism, the injustice. Well, now we go back into the first parable of the wandering sheep, how he got lost. But how do we bring him back? All right, well, here are the verbs or the key words, and there's 7 of these. And what we take from this, if we're going to help the church to grow, if we're going to help the church to thrive, these are the 7 components to that. All right, number 1, let's begin reading in, let me just read on the screen with you. What matter of you having 100 sheep if you lose one of them? Doth not leave the 99 in the wilderness to go after that which is lost until he find it? What percent of loss is that? 1%, right? He could have easily said, I got 99 other sheep, 1% is acceptable loss. Well, it's an acceptable loss unless you're the 1%, right? That one has a soul made in the representing a soul made in the image of God that's going to be judged and either live for eternity in heaven or hell. Yes, that one might only be 1%. You might have a thriving congregation, but that one is important to God. That one is loved, should be loved by the congregation so much they can't just let him walk away. Can't just. Now, I might ask it this way. This is one of those every sermon should have explanation, illustration, application. This is the application part. Now, you don't need to nod your head, bat your eyes, anything about the answers to these questions, but consider them. So, first question, are there any pews that are empty this morning where somebody used to sit? Don't you sit in the same place every Sunday? Pretty much everybody has an assigned seat that doesn't have their name on it, right? So we're creatures of habit. And you can look around and see who's not here by where they normally sit, right? And you say, well, so-and-so must be sick today or out of town, whatever. We would do that. All right, so are there any pews that are empty, not just today, but this year, not because somebody moved away with a job or education opportunity, so they didn't move away, they didn't pass away, they fell away. They're out there somewhere nearby, but they're not in here with us. Now, is there anybody like that? I would be surprised if any congregation would say, no, we don't have any like that. Okay, second question. When is the last time your car drove up their driveway and your hand knocked on their door and your voice said, I've come to check on you. How can I help? And I might ask a third question. When is anybody's car, anybody's hand, anybody's voice been seen and heard? We can't let them go to hell. And that's the result of moving away from Christ. 2 Peter 2:20-22. The latter end is worse with them than the beginning. They were lost to start with, but now they're even worse off because they know the truth and they forsook it. That implies degrees of punishment, of course. So, whoever that person is that's on your mind right now, and I have never met them, probably never will, but you know who you're thinking about, who's going to go see them this week? Who's going to talk? Who's going to pray? And I'll tell you who should go. Who should go? Well, the elders are the shepherds of the congregation. So they give an answer for every member under their tutelage or under their watch. Hebrews 13:17. So elders should go. Preachers care about souls. Preachers have a knowledge of the Scriptures that might have just the answer that is needed in that situation. Preachers should go. But let me tell you who should go in the big picture. This is the simple answer for it. The person who is most likely to bring them back is the person who should go. It might be a friend of theirs in the congregation that they've been close to, they've done things with, they know that the person has their best interest in mind. A friend. It might be a medical professional, other professional, somebody who's busy and has the respect of the community. I don't know if there's a medical doctor in this congregation. I'm not talking about any individual, but just use that for an illustration. If you have a man with a busy practice, woman with a busy practice, but let's just say a man with a busy practice, and he knocks on the door and they say, the kids say, well, Dr. So-and-so's here. He took time to come see me. What's he here for? Oh, I'm not here as a doctor. I'm here as a Christian. I've just been concerned about you. You see, the person ought to go that will have the most likely positive result from the visit. All right, that's number one. We've got to, we have to go. The 100 sheep, go find the lost one. 20th. Okay, so there are two verbs in that I want to emphasize, two ideas. The first verb is leave. You got to leave the 99. What is that? That's leave our comfort zone. I got to get out of my easy chair. I got to get out of my living room. I got to get out of my comfort zone. I'm not really comfortable talking to people about these kind of things. Well, I've got to get past that. Somebody's got to do it. And God expects me to do great things. If I'm going to make a difference in the world, I can't be fearful. I've got to do what, and God will give me the strength to do it. So number 1 is leave. Number 2 is go. That's our second verb. Leave our comfort zone. Go where the lost souls are. Wherever that is. Cross the street, cross town, cross the world. We go. We have to go. What is the message of the gospel? The Great Commission, go ye into all the world, it begins with go. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. He that believeth not shall be damned. Those are perhaps the 30 most important words Jesus ever said. Have you thought about that word gospel? G-O-S-P-E-L. The gospel begins with go. You know, that reminds us that it doesn't take itself. We have to go with it. The last 2 letters, E-L, what could those represent? How about everlasting life? That's the purpose of the gospel, isn't it? To get us to heaven. So go, everlasting life. But what about the middle 2 letters, S-P? What would those represent? How about some person? Some person taught you the gospel. Maybe a parent. Maybe a friend. Maybe a stranger knocked on your door or struck up a conversation in an airport somewhere, but some person brought the gospel to you. And whoever that person is, you have a very special place in your heart for them. Because without them, you wouldn't be where you are. Without them, no hope. Without them, no knowledge of salvation. Some person did that, so we have to pay that forward. You know, we could never pay them back. We could be thankful, and but we don't pay it back. We pay it forward. We do what someone did for us for someone else. That's how we repay that debt. And that's Romans 1:15. Paul said, as much as in me is, I'm ready to preach the gospel to you who are at Rome also. As much as in me is, I'm ready to do it. I'm always ready. All right, so that's the second verb, which is go. Third verb, or the third key, is stay. And this one I think is significant. I keep wanting to read in my Bible, I forget it's up here. He hath found it, and go after that which is lost. The word until is our next key word. He doesn't go and say, well, I tried. He doesn't go up to that house, knock on the door, nobody's home. Well, I tried. No, he keeps going back until somebody's home. He stays in the wilderness until he finds the sheep. Remember, the sheep got lost by wandering away. The shepherd doesn't know where the sheep is. So he thinks, well, I think I saw him going maybe this direction. So he goes out there and he goes down in one valley, and maybe he looks behind this, thick area of brush. No, he's not back there. So he stays out there saying, well, I don't know where, it's not here, but where could he be? Maybe he took this other route. So he goes over there. He stays until he finds the lost sheep. That's the fourth verb, which is find. Finally, he sees a little white patch. He said, I wonder what that is. And so he gets over there, maybe around a bend, down a hill, but he gets there. Oh, look, it's him. It's my sheep. I hope he's alive. I hope the predator didn't get him. And so he gets down there and he hears the bleating of the sheep. He says, oh, yes. So those are the first four verbs. Fifth verb is support. He lays it on his shoulders. He doesn't kick the lamb all the way back to the flock saying, you should have come out here. You caused me a lot of trouble. I'm upset with you. And he drives. No. He picks that lamb up. The sheep's probably worn out, He picks him up, puts him on his shoulders, and he carries the sheep all the way back to the flock. That represents, in a church context, support for new Christians and returning Christians. What does the church do for new Christians? Whatever it takes to keep them faithful. Whatever it takes. We have a class for them. We invite them over to our house to eat. We get to know them. We befriend them. We check on them. We teach them further. We give them materials. We are constantly involved in their lives trying to help them to get up to speed. You know, what is this about the Lord's Supper? We know their first Sunday, they got to understand that. What is there that sermon was about? I didn't get that. So somebody takes time to say, well, what he was saying was, let's go over this again, because that's pretty deep water. And this, new members, all of us would struggle with it. But here's what he's saying. So you just continue support. Put them on your shoulders. Carry them the first, month, 6 weeks, year, whatever it takes to get them on their feet where, they're good, they're steady, they're ready. The next one is rejoicing. Rejoicing. There are 3 levels of rejoicing in this story. There's the individual level, which is the shepherd and the sheep, both rejoicing because that which was lost is found. Second level is that the shepherd communicates to his friends and neighbors when he gets back, I found my sheep. So the whole community is concerned. They're invested in this, and they're saying, did you find it? He comes back, yes, I found it. He's alive. Everything's good. So there is a rejoicing at a community level. That's the church level. So someone is baptized into Christ. Certainly they come up out of the water rejoicing like the Ethiopian did in Acts 8:37 and 39. And the one who taught certainly is rejoicing. Oh, this is the greatest feeling in the world. But then the congregation rejoices. That probably goes out pretty fast if it's not a church service time by social media or text, whatever. The congregation already knows, but we certainly rejoice on the Wednesday night or the Sunday, the following church meeting time. Well, the whole church is, I can't wait to meet this person. I'm so excited. This is great. The church is growing. I love this church. That's the attitude. And then the third level is the heavenly level. There's rejoicing in heaven over one sinner that repents. So 3 levels. And if you mark in your Bible, the next time you read Luke 15, go through and mark joy, rejoice, and merry. Your lines will go all the way through the chapter, because it's a chapter about rejoicing. All right, then the last one is communication, which I just covered, but communication is involved. We need to communicate. All right, I need to go and move forward. So let's talk about number 2. What should I be willing to risk? My comfort zone? Here am I, send me, Isaiah 6:8. Number 2, I should be willing to risk my reputation. John 12:32 speaks of the chief rulers among the Jews who believed in Jesus, but they would not confess Him because of the Pharisees, who had threatened to kick them anybody out of the synagogue who believed in Jesus. So they kept their mouth shut and they didn't say anything, though they had belief in their hearts for the Lord. They didn't want to risk their reputation. 2 Corinthians 4:13, by contrast, talks about the apostles who were the offscouring of the earth, the world. Offscouring. That's not a word we use very much, but at the risk of being a little too plain, I'll just say, have you ever had a ring around the tub? Don't admit this if you do, right? But you ever had a ring around the tub? It's like, ooh, maybe behind the shower curtain, you say, ooh. So you get something cleaner, you really scrub. That's offscouring, and it's not pleasant. It's not something that we like, Paul, the other apostles, they saw themselves from the world's perspective. They treat us like scum, like a stain. Being defamed, that verse begins, defamed. It's the opposite of famous. It's having your fame by the world. Well, some people aren't willing to do that for Christ. But we've got to be willing to do as the apostles did, let the world think what they do, what they will. I'm going to stand up for my Lord. I'm going to talk about the gospel. They can call me a fanatic. They can come up with whatever mockeries they want to come up with. But I'm going to do what I know my Lord needs me to do, which is to be a mouth for Him. There's not anybody in this world that's hearing Jesus preach the gospel today. It's all by human mouths. There's nobody who's going to be saved this week that Jesus sat down at a table with in order to teach them the gospel. It will be one of His servants that sat down at that table to teach the gospel. That's the only way it happens today. So I have to be willing to risk my reputation. Somebody says, well, if I talk to my friend about the Bible, she might not be my friend anymore. When in the better land before the bar we stand, how deeply grieved our souls will be. If any lost one there should cry in deep despair, you never mentioned him to me. Do we want that experience? No. So we need to mention him. Number 3, am I willing to risk persecution? That is 2 Corinthians 11:23 to 25. And number 4, am I willing to risk my life? Acts 17:46. These are men who have hazarded their lives for the gospel. I will end with an illustration. I hope that it resonates with us, because I really, all these lessons, all these points just go back to the same thing, which is I've got to be personally invested. I've got to be willing to take initiative and ownership of the church. It's not they and them, it's we and us. I've got a part in this. All right, so the illustration. I did a gospel meeting some years ago, and a farmer invited me out for a meal during the meeting. I had met him before. I think he had come to PTP, but I didn't really know him. But I accepted the invitation and was glad to do it. We went down this long dirt driveway to this old country house in the middle of the fields. Went in and had a good meal. But I could tell he didn't feel well. And he had lost weight since I had known him, seen him at PTP. And over the course of that meal, we were talking about, as you do, making conversation. And his health came up. So he said, yeah, I'm really struggling. He had been going, I believe it was Africa, but some mission field, as a farmer. He had been going to teach them how to farm, and then he would teach the gospel. And he had made several trips. And on one of those trips, he contracted something. He came back, he got really sick, went to the doctor, specialists, they kept bouncing him around. Ended up with a contagious diseases specialist, I think. But they couldn't figure out what it was he had. And he told me, and that's the last time I saw him, at that meeting, he told me at that meal, he said, if they don't figure it out, I'm going to die. But you know what else he told me? You know where he was planning to go? Back to the mission field. He was going back. Romans 9:3, Paul said, I would be willing to be lost, that my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh were saved. I've never reached that level of risk-taking or of love. But we ought to get as close to it as we could. It's not possible to do that. You can't take somebody else's place. But Paul said, I'd be willing to if I could. All right, so what am I willing to risk to see the church thrive? Thank you for your attention. We'll be dismissed until